everyone, and welcome to Farrago, the Trial Site News Podcast. I'm Dr. Erin, your host, and we are going to be talking about obesity today, which is always in the news, obviously a major public health issue, clinical issue. And my guest today is CEO Mark Bagnall. And Mark, thank you so much for joining from the West Coast.
Great to be here. Great to be with you.
Awesome. So Phenomix, and tell us a little bit about yourself, this company, what you folks are doing that's different when it comes to obesity.
Well, thanks. Great to be with you. I'm originally a Brit, but I've been here for a long time, and I have been working in the biotech field since the early 90s. Recently, joined an organization, 7 years ago, joined an organization here on the West Coast called Health 2047, which is the American Medical Association's innovation arm. And in that role, my job was to look for interesting new technologies that could become companies that met certain criteria, including one, which we all feel very important, is those technologies that could be transformative in the area of chronic disease. And so about 5 years ago, met the founder of Phenomix Sciences, Dr. Andres Acosta, a Mayo Clinic physician. And he and his partner, Dr. Michael Camilleri, had been looking at the issue that still exists in the field of obesity, which is there is variability in response to any obesity intervention, whether it's a drug or a diet or a device, surgical technique. Some patients do well on certain of these interventions and some don't. So how do you figure that out? What can you do about it? And so they had done an amazing at the time, it was 5 years ago, amazing series of experiments over about 10 years, and had decided that obesity was not one disease, but many, 4 of which could be probably account for 80 to 90% of obesity. And if you knew the subtype, you would be able to pick treatments that did best for patients on a personalized basis. And so that's how Phenomix got founded, trying to understand a better way to help people with this disease that affects 40% of us.
Right. And so did this coincide with the rise of the obesity medications?
It did somewhat. You never know when you're going to be smart or when you're going to be lucky. I think we're a combination of both. But we made the investment into Phenomix in 2021, initial investment.
Okay.
And it was just around that time that there were the rumblings that we were going to get Wegovy approved. And so when Wegovy did get approved, it obviously had a transformative effect on the field. People didn't even know there were obesity medications available before that. You could get a pill? Yeah, you could get a pill. You could get a pill in 2015. And some of them were even quite effective. But really, this new wave of GLP-1 drugs has completely transformed the way we think about the disease, and I think for the better.
So it sounds like you're not going to criticize the medications. We have a lot of folks who do. They've expressed concerns. Maybe that's a better way to put it.
I think you should always be concerned about something that is taken up so rapidly. Right. But here's why I think I have 2 points of view. First of all, we've been using GLP-1s in diabetes for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So, and diabetes is not a small field. There's a lot of different patients who've been using these drugs and using them with great benefit to manage another difficult disease, type 2 diabetes. So we know a lot about them, and that's good. But I think the other thing that is important, and the thing that has been transformative, has been moving away from thinking that obesity is somehow a moral failing to really recognizing that this is a disease like all other diseases, and that we should be developing therapies, i.e. drugs, for them, and those drugs should be available to people who need them. And I think that's a healthy change in our attitude towards this huge medical issue.
I think that's a good perspective. I think as long as we also invest in agendas that are geared towards prevention, because we haven't done that so much, even testing dietary interventions and that kind of thing, so we can stop these things before they begin. But I agree with the problem.
Totally agree. Totally. Yeah. Yes. Great point. Don't get me started, so to speak.
It's okay. It's a podcast. You can get started. We have time. So Phenomix is about precision medicine, and we're hearing those terms together more and more, in different fields, psychiatry, for example. But can you tell us a little more about that and make the case for it regarding obesity? I know you mentioned before that people respond differently, and obviously that is a huge part of it. But if you could just get into the details a little more so people have a good understanding, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think this is as we think about obesity being treated more like a disease than a moral failing, it really requires us to then dig in from a clinical and scientific point of view into the disease and understand it better. And if you look at the drug world now, we were at a point where 5 years ago, I think they sold $500 million worth of drugs, and now it's going to be $150 billion worth of drugs. And from what I understand, there's something like 160 drugs in development. And those drugs, read a report, are addressing 68 separate mechanisms of the disease. So why are there so many different drugs, and why do they have so many different mechanisms? We're trying to solve the problem of trying to get people's average weight loss in clinical studies, to get the average weight closer and closer to the point of the same kind of weight loss you get from surgery, because we know from studies of surgery that the greater weight loss you get, the better benefits you get across all the comorbidities, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, it goes on, the list goes on, it's staggering actually. But underlying that point is that, a disease like obesity, like type 2 diabetes, like many chronic diseases, they're multifactorial. They change over time. These diseases are, let's say we've had this point of view that it's been somewhat of a moral failing, or maybe it's a failing of society. There's environmental factors, of food supply, how we exercise. But underlying the issue of obesity is that 40 to 50% of obesity can be explained by genetics. And not everybody's genetics are the same. We know for not everybody, that's a statement of the obvious. But with respect to how they end up with energy imbalance, so it's the energy imbalance, the too much food versus the amount of energy that you expend in a day, that energy imbalance is caused by different genetics amongst people. So how do you then differentiate between each individual's genetics and then tie that back to these different mechanisms that drug companies are developing drugs for? And so before all these drugs started getting developed, as I said, our founders went through a process at Mayo Clinic that only a place like Mayo Clinic will do, which is something called deep phenotyping. And deep phenotyping and phenotyping itself is looking at the observable traits of the disease. And even better if you have measurable traits, observable traits of a disease. So they looked at things like gastric emptying times by giving everybody a radio-labeled omelet in the morning and then doing nuclear imaging and seeing how fast the omelet went through your stomach, right? They gave people an ad libitum meal, which means you get as much lasagna and chocolate pudding as you can eat, and then measure, which, by the way, sounds delicious. I would love that, just as an aside. And then measuring how many calories each person took or could eat before they felt full. We did what they did, DEXA scans, so body composition scans, muscle versus fat. They did numerous questionnaires, you know, your typical cardiometabolic tests, but just a battery of tests. And every patient that went through Mayo Clinic for a clinical study, and it was about 1,000 patients, went through this enormous battery of phenotypic tests. And they were able, using a machine learning technique, to gather these traits into groups. And from those groupings, decided that there were 4 main subtypes of obesity. We call those subtypes hungry gut, hungry brain, emotional hunger, and slow burn. The first 3 are related to abnormal eating. And the last, slow burn, is abnormal energy expenditure.
So wait,
But
hungry gut.
So hungry gut are people who most likely tend to snack between meals. That's what you kind of see from the outside.
Okay.
Hungry brain patients tend to be folks who just don't feel full no matter how much they eat. So as you sit down for Thanksgiving, you're going back to thirds and fourths and you don't feel full. And emotional hunger is eating for emotional reward.
Yeah.
And what they did is, having looked at these groupings that they had got through this phenotyping technique, they realized that they could then match those to interventions. So if you're a hungry gut patient, turns out you do better on a GLP-1. If you're a hungry brain patient, you do better on a drug called Qsymia, which has been around for 10 years, well known. But you will do better on Qsymia than you will on a GLP-1. And if you are a emotional hunger patient, you will do well on a drug called Contrave, which has similarly been around for some time. And that is a drug that is approved for obesity, but also for those patients who are eating for an emotional reward. So this, and they have done clinical studies in many patients on GLP-1s, on Qsymia, on Contrave. They've looked at diets, they looked at devices, medical devices, and they've looked at surgeries and shown that you can pair up the intervention, specific intervention, with a phenotype. One of the more fascinating studies that they did was actually with diet and exercise programs. And a group of patients were on a standard Mayo Clinic type diet, and another group of patients had their diet, exercise, behavioral interventions personalized by their phenotype. And some of them lost as much weight as they would have done on drug therapy. So back to your question of prevention, back to your question of, are there better ways? Are there alternative ways? Yes, there are alternative ways. We do better when the intervention we pick, whichever one of those interventions we pick, is paired up with our genetics and with our emotions and with our body composition.
Right. So it sounds like you can use this phenotype testing and match it up. It can, whether it's medication, lifestyle intervention, diet, it makes sense to know what it is. Question for you. Can a person be 2 phenotypes or 3 phenotypes?
Great question. Yes. And in a publication that I think came out last year, maybe the year before, I now forget, Mayo Clinic showed that if you have more than one phenotype, sadly, you gain more weight. Which, makes sense. You're dealing with two issues. And I think this is kind of the important part of this discovery is you really have to think of these now not as, it's a subtype of obesity. It's a different disease, right? It's a different condition. And guess what? If you have 2 conditions, to get better, you have to, fight against 2 different issues. And so, of course, you're going to struggle more. Of course, it's going to be more difficult,
right,
to lose weight and to manage the disease.
Right.
So, yes, there are patients with 2, 3, very rare cases, all of them. But yes, you can have all of those conditions, and it becomes a more difficult disease to manage the more of them you have.
Wow, yeah. So how does your company practically work for patients or doctors? And I also just want to make our listeners aware that links to all of the research that you're discussing, the papers, are on the company's website. So I'll be sure to include that in the podcast description. But yeah, so how does it work for doctors or patients?
Yeah, so last year we launched a test called the MyPhenome test. It is a genetic test that identifies the first 3 phenotypes: hungry gut, hungry brain, and emotional hunger. Those happen to be the phenotypes for which there are currently drugs approved. So that's why we launched that particular combination. And it's a simple to use test because it is a cheek swab test. Would be ordered by a patient's physician. So we have been signing up, at least initially, obesity specialists, beginning to go beyond obesity specialists in terms of the physicians we sign up. But on our website, there's a map of the U.S. with all of the obesity physicians that we have signed up who can order the test. And it's pretty simple once you order it. You take this cheek swab test, put it in the mail, and 3 to 4 weeks, we get a notification to log into the portal, and then you receive a report that not only describes what the outcome is, so your genetics show that you have a greater risk of, let's just say hungry brain, than any of the other phenotypes. But then also gives you and your physician some input on what that means and what to do about it. So in particular for the physician, obviously, some materials related to the research that you pointed out, what type of drug is the most appropriate, what kind of device or other medical intervention, and then for the patient, diet advice. You have this phenotype, here's the diets we recommend, here's the type of food you recommend.
That's included on your website.
And that's included on the website and in the report.
Okay, great.
And in the report. So you get a full description of what that means to you to get better as fast as you can.
Right. Well, also one of the criticisms given the prescription of the obesity medications is that doctors often don't provide dietary advice along with that, tailored, to that person's needs and lifestyle. And a lot of that has to do probably with how much time a doctor might get with a patient. So, and our healthcare system is about,
yes,
get him in the door, get him out, get the other one in, right? So.
And I think, the thing that's tough, patients who come to, especially by the time you've come to a obesity specialist, you've likely struggled with this disease for many years, right? You've probably spent money on diet programs, supplements, a number of different approaches that haven't worked. And so, what we feel is we have a unique insight thanks to this work that was done at Mayo Clinic. We can give a patient our best possible advice across all the types of ways that you can get better. Mm-hmm. Given the depth of research, 10 years of studies showing that all these different approaches work, including lifestyle approaches, I think it's just it's the right thing to do to make sure a patient is fully armed. Right. We want this to be part of their journey to get better. I think one of the things that has been great about the new drugs is it's given people hope who've been struggling for a long time. And our job is to reinforce that hope and to give them yet one more angle, one more piece of information about their own genetics so that they can deploy the full range of interventions, including changing their lifestyle for the better, that meets them at where they are personally. We can understand their genetics and give them that personalized advice.
And going back to us moving away from, obesity is a moral failing, which, we've shamed people. Obviously, shaming someone doesn't make them lose weight, just makes them feel bad. I appreciate that you said these folks have tried a lot of things, and sometimes we'll see, on social media, people are like, oh, you just have to eat right and exercise. This person knows that, has been told that countless times, has tried that, and, it's not working for that person. So now I will say, maybe there is something in our food, maybe there is something on a societal level that we have to change and we have to find. I'm all for that, but
no doubt.
Shaming a person or saying it's a moral failing is not where it's at. So.
Yeah. Well, and look, there's many different layers and levels of this, right? One of the levels is genetics, and we're able to provide an insight in that, and that's our job. It'll be other people's jobs, hopefully, to do better with, food supply and how we live. But I think, the one of the clear one of the clear revelations, at least for me, is because it's genetics, you know that was built in, right? That's built into our design to eat a certain way. But our environment has changed around us a lot, right? 10 years ago, I would have met you somewhere, and I've got on a plane and I've flown out to see you. And it would have required a fair amount of exercise to be sitting here with you, right?
Right.
Now get up, take a shower, then I'm sitting here in my, so I mean, it's, we've made our lives a lot less mobile, and food is a lot easier.
Much easier.
Food is just a click on this thing away. So lots of things we can do to change all that. Unlikely we're going to change our genetics.
Right. And change is slow in this area. But I'm positive that we'll do more on the prevention front, but we will also need, the treatment front. Do you believe this phenotype testing could also be used as a preventive strategy as well as a treatment strategy?
Yes, I think so. We are exploring that. We have got some work ongoing to look at whether because your genes really don't change. So if you already have the disease and we can tell you that you have one category of the disease, you probably had that genetics when you were a child. Almost certainly had those genetics when you were a child. And so how many of the people who have those genes and that genetic makeup that we're now using that to subcategorize, how many of those people will when they are normal weight as a child, then at some point in the future transition to obesity, is something we're trying to determine. And can that provide an insight into earlier intervention and prevention? And the reason is obvious, right? The comorbidities for obesity are very broad, and there are huge knock-on effects of this disease in terms of not only the comorbidities but the cost, and just the issues of lifestyle and quality of life. So if we could intervene earlier, if we could identify patients earlier, we think that would be a great benefit. Not the greatest focus of what we're doing, but certainly something that we would like to participate in.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be really interesting. As if any kind of chronic disease, if you can intervene early, that's better than later, but we're not there yet. I was curious, does insurance cover this yet, or?
Insurance does not cover this yet. Something we're working on, and have been talking to various insurance companies. There's opportunity to work with some health plans that we're already discussing, as they are looking to make sure that they are deploying. These new drugs are pretty costly,
right?
And so there's an opportunity to use our test in that setting too.
Right. Well, and that was definitely what remains one of the criticisms of the deployment of the obesity drugs, is that they were actually increasing obesity-related health disparities, because the people who could afford them would get them, and the people who can't, who also, tend to have a lot more chronic health issues and access issues in general. I think they've been working on that, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, no, I think the drug companies are certainly aware of that. both Novo and Lilly have cash pay access programs, which I think that was a step in the right direction. But clearly, to be able to use, a test like ours to rule out whether or not patients will do well on a drug, I think is helpful because we just need, when you have something this expensive, but this valuable, you really need to be thoughtful about the costs and allocating the resource carefully.
I agree. I also think, as if I was a patient, I would really be curious to know. I'd want to know what my phenotype was. And even if I didn't want to take medication for whatever reason, just say I was concerned about side effects, I would really love to know what diet, is better.
Well, we've had a lot of, it's so funny you say that, Aaron. We have a lot of people who are normal weight, may or may not have struggled with weight gain in the past, who want to take the test to understand their genetics.
Yeah.
Why 5 years ago was I struggling with my weight? What, maybe that has something to do with where I may need to look out for in the future.
Right.
But
yeah,
I think understanding, one of the things that we have seen is for patients to understand the issues around their weight from the perspective that their genetics is it's just extremely helpful to coming to grips with something that's been such a puzzle for such a long time. One of the things, there's a case of a young man who, it just fascinated me. Struggled with his weight. GLP-1s came out. He's one of our patients, and went on a GLP-1, and it did nothing. He actually gained weight. And I just imagine the frustration of that. You've struggled your life. This new miracle drug comes out, and nothing happens. In fact, you're worse off.
right.
Took the test. He was hungry brain. Physician put him on Qsimia. I think he's at this point down somewhere close to 50 pounds.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
Just to know that you have a specific subset of this disease, and to be able to have the burden of, all of the guilt of the, moral failing that's been put on you, and then you take the miracle drug, right, and then that doesn't work. So that just reinforces that it was a moral failing. But then he was able to take the test and figure out that the genetics, he had different genetics. The genetics would never work for a GLP-1. It wasn't going to work. It wasn't his fault. He just had the genetics that made Qsimia the better drug choice. And he took it, and now he's doing well, right? That understanding that, you have a personalized, that your obesity is unique and personalized, and you can personalize your intervention to you. I think that just, goes beyond just I'm getting better from the physical part of the disease. I'm getting better from just the entire burden that society puts on people who are suffering from this.
Right. And, just it helps you combat that stigma. And
Yes.
I can imagine, just feeling mentally and spiritually lifted, of course. Then that's empowering beyond the physical benefits of losing the excess weight.
Right.
For sure. So I was going to actually, one of my questions was, do you have an anecdote? But you just shared one. So that was a pretty good one.
Sorry, Aaron. I should wait for the question. You know, Haley has clearly not properly trained me in this. But yes, I should wait for the questions.
That was great. And yeah, I think I pretty much covered all the questions that I was going to ask. Is there anything else?
No, that's great.
Yeah, I think this is really, I mean, I'm curious, you know, as I would imagine some of our listeners are, they're probably sitting there thinking like, what am I? You know, just in case. And yet maybe it's not someone who's struggling with obesity, but maybe, as you alluded to earlier, our weight can go up and down over our lifetime.
No, I'll tell you, it was fascinating. Obviously, I've taken the test, and I've my weight bounces around. You know, 20 years ago, I you know, my BMI was pretty much at 30. So, and just knowing it's really interesting, and what it does in terms of what you watch out for is really interesting too. So, yeah, it makes a difference. Fascinating, and hats off to the guys at Mayo Clinic for doing the work, because to get to this type of level of understanding is a lot of very clever scientific work and clinical rigor.
Right. Now, what about the slow burn folks? Are they?
So yeah, interestingly, there are drugs now in development for slow burn.
Okay. Is that just like a slow metabolism?
Yeah. So slow metabolism. So there are drugs that help speed up metabolism. And you know, there are a few in development. I think they're probably 2 or 3 years away. In the study we did on lifestyles, Mayo Clinic did on lifestyle, the slow burn patients from a lifestyle point of view did very well on resistance training plus properly timed protein supplements, usually kind of some kind of protein shake, because it's very closely related to muscle mass.
Right.
So for those slow burn patients who have you know, who can increase muscle mass, they saw a significant benefit, weight loss and muscle regain.
Oh,
which is pretty interesting, because one of the big issues with all weight loss interventions are changes in body composition, particularly muscle mass loss. But this particular intervention worked really well for those patients.
That's really good to know. And muscle loss, especially as people get older, because you want to really retain your muscle. So I think that is an issue that is worth highlighting for sure.
Yes. Yes.
So resistance training for the slow burners and protein, get out there, lift some weights.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. More weights. There are weights right down here on the floor behind me.
Yeah. I did a workout this morning with intervals and weights, and
yeah,
I'm laughing. My stomach's actually growling. I'm like, really, Aaron, during this particular podcast, I'm like, hopefully you can't hear it, Mark. But I've been fasting all day. So, I'm one of those workout fasting types of people. So there we are. But this was great. And I will share the website. And really, it's any doctor or person, a patient can get in touch and learn.
Yeah, please reach out. We want to hear from everybody who you know is either struggling with a weight or physicians who are now getting into the practice. A lot more physicians in the practice want to hear from them. Want to hear their stories of how they're treating this disease, how they're feeling about the new drugs and what we can do to help with the practice if you're a physician, and with your health and getting better if you're a patient.
Right. Find the right drug earlier, save time, cost, frustration. So yeah, absolutely. All right, Mark, thanks so much.
This has been great.
Yes,
Thank you for having me on. Really
absolutely.
appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining in, and hope you subscribe to the podcast and check out Trial Site News for up-to-date research articles, clinical trials, new drugs, new interventions, all that sort of stuff. And thanks for tuning into this episode.